Good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. My name is Kate Bruns, and on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard University Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, I am so pleased to welcome you to this event with Antonio Damasio, presenting his new book, Feeling and Knowing, Making Minds Conscious, with an introduction tonight from Harvard's Greg Keston. Before I turn things over to Dr. Keston to introduce tonight's event, I'm just going to say a few remarks. This event is a part of our Harvard Science Book Talk series, which brings the authors of recently published science-related literature to our Cambridge community and now far, far beyond it. Be on the lookout for more virtual science book talks coming up this fall, including with Ritu Raman on November 10th, discussing her book, Biofabrication, and Alexander Redding and Daniel K.L. Chua on November 16th, discussing their book, Alien Listening, Voyager's Golden Record and Music from Earth. So to learn more about the series, visit the webpage harvard.com/science or sign up for the bookstore's email newsletter at harvard.com. We also have a YouTube page where you can see any previous talks that you might have missed. And I'm going to be posting links in the Zoom chat in just a few minutes. Tonight's event is going to conclude with some time for your questions. If you would like to ask something, please go to the Q&A button on your screen where you can submit a question. We're going to get through as many as time allows for. And also a reminder that if you would like closed captions, you can click on the live transcript tab at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I would also like to say a tremendous thank you for your patronage during these strange virtual times. Your support makes this author series possible, and it ensures the future of a landmark independent bookstore. So thank you to our partners at Harvard University, and thanks to all of you for tuning in and showing up for our authors, for indie book selling, and especially for science. And finally, as you certainly know with virtual gatherings, technical issues can arise. And if they do, I will do my best to resolve them quickly. So thank you for your patience and your understanding. And now I am excited to turn things over to theoretical physicist, Harvard faculty, and film producer, Dr. Greg Keston. Alongside his research and his teaching, Dr. Keston produces incredible educational online content. And I know him in particular from his work with the research team for PBS Nova, where he researched and consulted on scientific content, assisted in short film production, wrote documentaries, storylines, and articles, and he produced the awesome video series, What the Physics. So without further ado, Dr. Keston, the digital podium is yours.
Thank you, Kate. Well, I am honored to introduce Professor Antonio Damasio, who is university professor, David Dornsife Professor of Neuroscience, Psychology, and Philosophy, and the director of the Brain and Creativity Institute of the University of Southern California, Los Angeles. And awards he's received, of which there are many, some of which are the Prince of Asturias Prize in Science and Technology, the Grawemeyer Award, the Honda Prize, and the Pessoa and Signore Prizes. He's the author of many books, including Descartes' Error, The Feeling of What Happens, Looking for Spinoza, Self Comes to Mind, The Strange Order of Things, and Feeling and Knowing, all of which have been published in translation and are taught in universities across the world. And tonight he'll be discussing with us his most recent book, Feeling and Knowing, Making Minds Conscious. You know, in the recent decades, many philosophers and cognitive scientists have declared the problem of consciousness unsolvable. But in the book, Professor Damasio, drawing on recent findings across multiple scientific disciplines, has given us a way to understand consciousness and its significance for human life. In Feeling and Knowing, he helps us understand why being conscious isn't the same as sensing, why nervous systems are essential for the development of feelings, explaining, for example, why a plant isn't conscious, but you are, and explains why feelings open the way to consciousness. Kirkus Reviews writes, Damasio is a deep thinker familiar with multiple disciplines, and this work is as much a work of philosophy as it is of hard science. readers will discover rewarding insights, which we're excited to hear about tonight. Professor Damasio, the stage is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your very kind and very generous introduction. I'm pleased to be here. The program changed a little bit. I was going to have a conversation with Jory Graham, a great poet who is interested in science as well. And I'm interested in poetry, so that would have been a good match. But the event turned out to be different thanks to weather, which changed things a little bit, as I understand, in Cambridge and on Martha's Vineyard. So thank you, Greg. It's a great pleasure to hear you, to hear your thoughtful comments, and to know about your work as well. So I think that what I'm going to do is give you an idea of what the book is, and tell you a little bit about its history, and then tell you about the substance of the book, so that then we can have a conversation, because I know that many of you are watching and listening in different points, and probably will have questions. So let's start with what the book is. This is a book that has an interesting history. For those of you who know some of my best work, either from scientific articles or from books, know that I'm not exactly a brief writer, and my books tend to be long, and sometimes they are 400 pages or bigger. And my editor, Dan Frank at Pantheon, a couple of years ago said, wouldn't it be nice if for once you would write a brief book, a book in which you would make very directly tangible the kinds of things that you're interested in, facts from the science, thoughts that you have had. And I was very surprised, because my reaction was actually very good. And I said, well, provided I can do that in my own time and in my way, and provided this cannot be confused with some kind of summary closed on a given date, but rather as something that is evolving. And he said, of course, no problem. So what we ended up actually is with 48 separate chapters, but very small chapters actually. And instead of 400 pages, you have 250 or something like that. And we did honor the idea that not only was I going to summarize or distill some ideas that are already settled and facts that are already settled, but also talk about a little bit about the future and what I was expecting when I finished the book that would happen. And I'm very pleased to say that this actually is taking place, because since the book was finished, there have been at least 3 scientific articles that have been published and that already advance on the story that the book is telling. And so I begin by saying that the book is a sort of haiku in the sense that I really tried to chip away at anything that was not essential when I was writing it. Reading it today, which I've been obliged to do a couple of times, I think I could have cut even more, and I could have said things differently, but that's of course the plight of all of us that write and publish, is that if we're really honest and smart, we realize that we should do it again, because it's never good, or at least it's never good enough. So with the tribute to my editor, Dan Frank, who came up with the idea, let me start with what the book is about. So first start with the title, Feeling and Knowing, Making Minds Conscious. Well, feeling appears to be rather obvious. Knowing appears to be rather obvious. But what I want is that ampersand between the two. It's feeling really leading to knowing, and after the colon, I'm really saying that feeling and the knowing that it brings is helping make minds conscious. That's really the the aim of this particular book. But let me start with what these words mean. When I use the word feeling, I want to be very clear that you in the audience are not listening to me talk about emotion. And that's it's unfortunate in most circumstances when people use the term feeling, which I use often in very specific ways. What people hear is emotion, because feeling, of course, connects with affect. And the first notion that comes to one's mind when you talk about affect is emotion. Well, let me make sure that we make these terms very clear, and I'm using them in perfectly conventional ways. And I would say that what happens is that in our daily parlance, we use them in unconventional ways that are not very clear. So when I talk about feelings, I talk about experiences. I talk about phenomena that are not visible to anyone. You cannot see my feelings ever. I cannot see yours. So it is something that is subjective, it's an experience, it's happening in my mind. Nobody has access to it. Whenever I talk about emotions, I'm talking about something public. If I now suddenly am moved and cry, you will see that expressed in my face. If I am in fear, you'll see that expressed not just in my face, but my whole body will recoil from the camera, and you will see that I am in fear. And you know that I am in fear because the actions that I am taking when I'm in fear or in moved to tears, they're actions that are extremely patterned. We have our own individuality. We all are in fear or angry or cry in a different way. Slightly, there's some individuality to that, but by and large, there is a pattern. There's something that I like to call a little concert that is played, and you can play that same concert. You can can play the same Mozart melody with different instruments, with a full orchestra, or with a cello only. And so the variations are, in a way, relatively superficial when they're contrasted with what's in the score, okay? So emotions are about actions, patterned actions, visible, inspectable to the outside world, whereas feelings are not. Feelings are private, subjective processes. And the next thing that we need to talk about is the relationship between these terms and what I am really talking about in the book. Primarily, I'm talking about what I like to call homeostatic feelings. Examples of homeostatic feelings, you have hunger, thirst, you have desire, you have well-being, you have pain, you have malaise. All of those feelings that I'm talking about are feelings that have something extremely powerful in common. They are all about states of the body. They're all about states in which our bodies can be right this minute, and that have a relationship to how our physiology is operating. If you are undernourished at the end of the morning and you say, I'm hungry, that means that your energy level is dropping, and in your mind, you have a representation of your body in a particular state where it lacks energy to continue. So you get that information, you get that knowledge, feeling, knowing, you get that knowledge through the feeling process. And once again, it's something that nobody will see. You know, because you are feeling, you have that information coming to you directly from your body, from lots of a very complicated physiological process. You're being informed that you are hungry or that you are thirsty. You could also be informed that, for example, something went wrong in some part of your body and that you are now in pain. Not only that, you could have the feeling of pain, and with some continuity over time, if the pain is not treated, and you are actually in suffering, which, by the way, you can also use in a symbolic way when you have, for example, something go wrong in your career or in your love life, and you say that you are suffering. Not exactly physical pain, but you are using that same notion that came out of the physical pain that you have felt with the homeostatic feeling of pain. And of course, let's not be just unhappy and talk about well-being. That's also a feeling. Now, what all of these events have in common is the fact that in the case of homeostatic feelings, they are giving you precious new information about the state of the body at this precise minute. Either good, in which case there's well-being, or different kinds of problem that you can solve by eating or drinking, or by resolving to go to the dentist if you have tooth pain. So what is happening right there is something that unfortunately people tend not to reflect too much on, but it's something that I would say is quite momentous. And this is really what the book is about, is the fact that feelings are, for me, inaugural events in the great story of consciousness. So when you have one of these feelings that I just talked about, you are spontaneously, naturally becoming conscious of a lot of things. You're becoming conscious of something that is happening in your body. So what you're suddenly conscious of is not about something happening out in the outside world. No, it's in your body. Not only that, you are referring it uniquely, positively to your own body. And that's the reason why you can talk about an experience. All of this is connected very nicely with your body. So you have the feeling, but you also have the location of that feeling. That feeling is not happening across my living room over there. That feeling is happening in my body or in your body. So what this is telling you is that there's a feeling that gives you plenty of information, and that information is yours and yours alone, and you can do something with that information. So you're not having something that is, from the point of view of biology, gratuitous. You're having, on the contrary, something that is vital, and that, I believe, happened relatively early in the development of organisms of our kind. It didn't develop with all living organisms to begin with, because when you go back in the history of living organisms, you realize that they started out very humbly. When you think about bacteria or paramecia, or even when you think about other organisms that, for example, Greg referred to, like plants, these are organisms that have few cells, or not that many, and that actually do not have a nervous system. They don't need it. And they don't need it for a very good reason, is that nervous systems probably only developed in the long history of evolution once our systems, well, first of all, once there was plenty of multicellularity, there were cells galore. And then there were also different organs, and then there were different systems. And all of this was becoming a bit jumbled and lacking in coordination. There was something that was brilliantly produced by evolution, which is the nervous system. And nervous system first through nerves that connected different regions, and eventually through nerves that connected with central nuclei, the kind of things that today exist in our spinal cord, in our brainstem, in our cerebrum. Those were systems that helped coordinate the functions of very different parts that had sort of run out of the possibility of communicating with some precision and individuality with just molecules that could be disseminated and available throughout an entire body. So out of this growing complexity come organisms with nervous systems. And once there are nervous systems, eventually we'll come to the possibility of generating a representation of the state of your body in a particular way, good, bad, or indifferent. And that is what feelings are about. And once again, they are these inaugurations of what eventually becomes consciousness. Now, of course, today, when we talk about consciousness, we talk about something extremely complex that it involves not only representations of our body, those that come in the form of homeostatic feelings, but also representations of the world around. Why? Because we have devices such as our retinas and visual systems, or such as our cochlea and auditory system, that allow us to sense what eventually is the material in our vision, or what is the material that we hear in sounds of the world or music or what have you. And eventually we can do all this translated into whatever language we have developed, and we can organize through the help of memory, we can organize a complex reasoning process, which allows us to have that precious development that we call rationality, and that allows us to take on the world and look at it from the point of view of our knowledge of the world, with, of course, the proviso that all of that only makes sense and only is productive for us human beings if we combine it with this other world, which is the world of affect, and it's giving us the feelings that we have about our own body, and eventually the feelings that we have of the emotive states we're in, whether they're happy states or fearful states or complete bliss. So the idea here is that feelings were the very beginning of this great adventure called consciousness, and that contrary to the sometimes quite common view that consciousness is a problem that has no solution, and that we just have to resign ourselves to the fact that whatever treatment we do always falls short. And obviously I don't believe that. I respect the idea that some colleagues have that it can't be solved, but I don't share that idea. I think that especially when you look at it through the prism of feeling, you realize that there's a very beautiful possibility there. I'm not saying that it's all fully explored, but it's there. And in one of the ways in which feeling is so powerful in terms of providing a solution is in the fact that whatever we see or hear or touch or taste, we have a possibility of having those extremely complex, highly evolved representations that come out of incredibly refined devices, a cochlea or a retina, or the visual and auditory cortices are absolute wonders, and wonders that we fortunately have a very good grasp on because the science has been done, and a lot of this science actually has been done in your neck of the woods, because Harvard has been one of the major producers of results along those lines. But then once you have those beautiful representations of the world that surround us, we always have the possibility of connecting them to the representation we have of our own organism living in whatever conditions it is, good, bad, or indifferent, with pleasurable or painful or something in between feeling. And when you connect what you see out in the world with what you have in yourself, in the organism that is mentally represented by virtue of having feeling produced in them, When you make that connection, you have consciousness resolved. The consciousness that I have of the mountains to my right is a consciousness that happens because I can look at the mountains and I can connect them with the feeling I have of my body. My body is here, and my feeling is coming out of this commingling of neural processes, evidently, but also processes that come from the body and that are not neural at all. So there's this marriage or interaction, whatever you want to call it, doesn't make any difference. I just want to make sure that you understand that to have a feeling of happiness, or to have a feeling of well-being, or to have a feeling of pain, is not a perception of your body in some kind of state. It's more than that. It's an interaction that is going on between your nervous system and your body. And as a result of that interaction, what you get is a hybrid. You're not, it's very interesting. If I go back 20 years, I fear to even read what I wrote, say, 30 years ago, because I'm pretty certain that there are things that may be sort of generally acceptable, but in this particular domain are quite incomplete because I did not know then what I know now. And I probably may have said, well, to have pain is to perceive something that is wrong with your body in one particular place. You have an ulcer and you perceive pain, which really means that you're perceiving what is going on in the mucosa of your stomach or of your gut. Well, it's not quite like that. It's more complicated because there's this interactivity, and that's what makes feeling so completely different from the perception that I have of the outside world. And that's also what may help us explain consciousness in greater detail, not just at the conceptual detail that I've given you. And of course, as long as we only look at the body as a source of perception, you don't really contribute to the solution of the problem of consciousness. But once you know the physiology of what is going on in your nerve cells that are looking out at your body, and what is going on in the body that creates that interaction, then you have a grasp of some possibilities that can make us advance the world of physiology, of consciousness. So think of what you perceive in your body. It's not just plain perception, it's perceiving quotes. You're really getting a grasp of this unity. And it's so interesting because just think of this very obvious fact, but that people tend not to comment on. When you look out in the world or hear the world around you, the world is there and you're here. And there's this abyss between our living organism and the world that surrounds us. When you think about the world that is in your guts, in your lungs, and in your blood circulating in all the arteries and arterioles of your body, it's completely different. All that stuff is inside you. You have this perimeter of your body, covered by musculoskeletal elements, and then by a skin over it, which in itself is an organ, is one of the viscera. And all this, there's all this stuff inside. You don't need to go anywhere. You just can interact freely because everywhere, in every nook and cranny of your body, there are nerve terminals. And everywhere in your body, there are cells and molecules that are not in the nervous system, but that can interact with the nervous system. So the possibility of this dialogue is not just a possibility, it's there all the time. And that's where you're going to get your feeling, and that's where you're going to get your knowing. And that's why this book is called Feeling and Knowing, and it's about making minds conscious. I think I would, as you probably have noticed, I'm a little bit enthusiastic about this stuff, and I probably could continue talking for an hour, which would mortify my wonderful hosts at the Harvard Bookstore. So I'm going to shut up right now and listen or read your questions.
Thank you so much. We have a combination of awesome questions coming at me from all directions. So I'm going to do my best to not repeat anything you've said or maybe recap things. Let's see. We have a question from Mark in the audience, Dr. Damasio, who says, are there basic emotions, or what are they, as well as private feelings, and are both contagious through mirror neurons and somatic markers?
Very good. Okay, so, it disappeared. Never mind. So there are, yes, I would say that there are basic emotions, and there's a certain repertoire of emotions that is very easy to identify. It's not, I don't want to give the impression that emotions are something completely independent and routine and completely prepackaged, because I think we, not just actors in the theater or film, but we ourselves can modify the way in which our emotions are presented. But the reason why any of us, in the audience, me here, you that are helping with this event, that the reason why we look at somebody and can say that that person is sad or joyful, the reason why we look at that person laughing and we're not going to confuse that with crying, is that there is a certain amount of stereotypy in emotions. So while there is room for interpretation, while there's room to, again, I think I had a musical illusion. There's a way of interpreting the emotion, but the core is extremely stereotypical. And then you can have all the variations you want. That's also, by the way, the reason why you very rapidly look at animals that have nothing to do with us in terms of their detailed physiology, or have a lot to do with us, their physiology, but nonetheless they're different. You look at a dog, or you look at an elephant, or you look at a cat, and you normally recognize emotions. And you say, oh, that animal is sad, or that animal is jumping for joy. Why? Because they're, by the way, with different bodies. And yet there's something about the motoric of the animal, certain what they do with their paws or what they do with their faces, that immediately puts in mind a certain emotive pattern. So yes, there are certain patterns of emotion that I would say actually are universal. How far down, I don't know. I'm not sure about picking up on the sadness or joy of fish, but I presume you probably could go there and say something intelligent about it. But there's room for variations. And then all of this has its own effects on the body. And as a result of those effects, we have what I call emotional feelings. So it's very different. It's one thing is to have feelings like thirst or hunger or desire, which are feelings that are the result of representing natural states of the body that have to do with their homeostasis, have to do with the regulation of life in the body. And another thing is to represent movements and a lot of actions that are actually being taken mostly by the musculoskeletal system. Because think about it, when you laugh or when you cry, it's the musculature in your face and in your body, or when you have fear or anger. It's a different system that is giving you those movements. They're still in the body, but they're not in the interior body, the one that has that full circulatory connection through molecules and the bloodstream. So there's room there for a lot of variations. And of course, this has different ages, because once again, when you go to homeostatic feelings, you can recognize them in creatures that are extremely simple. And when you go to the emotions as we understand them, we're thinking mostly of the emotions of humans and the emotions of big animals, where you can recognize through the motoric a certain kind of response. Thank you for the question. Let's have another one.
Yeah, we have several questions here about other types of, well, primates in particular. But so we have a question from Bill that asks, do other higher primates, chimps, gorillas, bonobos, have consciousness? And if they don't, how would you describe their experience if they have experiences?
So my answer is absolutely, I think they have consciousness. Now, if you want me to prove that, I can go through a lot of exercises to prove that for you. But I would say, yes, they have consciousness. It would be unthinkable if anybody has a dog or a cat or an elephant at home, I can guarantee you that you look at those creatures and you realize that they are conscious. And they are. They're conscious in the way they behave. They're conscious the way they look at something, and you recognize through the acts of that particular animal that something was understood about the surroundings, something was even understood about the connection to you. And of course, that would not have happened if they were not conscious. So I think that they, just like us, have a possibility of representing their selves. Those selves are being represented thanks to that world of feeling, because they have, the anatomy is on the surface very different, but in the end, extremely similar. You have the same arrangement, you have structures of the interior in different viscera. You then have muscles, you have muscles that move bones, you have nerve endings that bring information about all this into the central nervous system. You have the responses from the central nervous system towards all of these organs, so that you can close this conversation and have a dialogue that goes from the brain to every part of your body, and from every part of your body to the brain. So the idea that they would not have feelings is absolutely anathema. They do. And that, by the way, is very important, because of the way we have to face something that we, as owners of the earth, so-called, have done very wrong, which has to do with the way animals are treated. And there's clearly the way animals, or plants for that matter, are treated, and in some cases abused, is not correct. And it becomes very important for you to know that those creatures have feelings, because once again, it's through feeling and through the possibility of doing something that is harmful to those animals that you're going to get into the possibility of suffering. Now, would you want to have the animals that are around you to suffer, whether they're animals that you eat normally or animals that you just do bad things for, like in mismanaged forests and so forth? So it's very important that this notion of consciousness has enormous impact on that part of our lives that we very often are not terribly sensitive to, but is quite critical.
Okay, so we have a question that totally related to this. I want to make sure I'm not turned around here. But so the question is, are there creatures possessive of feelings that are not conscious? Does that, like, for example, do spiders feel, are they conscious?
Okay, that's a very beautiful question. And it's not, you need to be very attentive to the answer. I need to fabricate the answer right now. And that is, there's a distinction between sensing and feeling. For example, you can have extremely simple creatures, living creatures, that don't have a nervous system, and that I think do not have a mind, and that clearly I think do not have feeling. And yet they can sense things. Even unicellular organisms, extremely simple organisms, can sense in a part of their environment that, for example, the temperature is too high, or the temperature will be too low, or that there is, for example, if they need some kind of nutrient, that the the territory of the environment is bad in terms of the quantity of nutrients. So that is not feeling, because I think that what is happening there is a detection. The word sensing is already a little bit loaded, because sensing senses, the language is just not clear enough. And we have all the baggage of our culture that gives it special meanings. But detection is clearly good, because you can have detection actually for a living creature as well as for an artificial creature that detects, a robot that detects the presence of something. So detection is one thing, and it does not mean that that creature has feelings. I don't think that plants have feelings, and yet they have detection of plenty of things that is happening, for example, to their root system. There's a little chapter in Feeling and Knowing, which is actually about plants. And they can detect, for example, the presence of water or the lack of water, and they can orient the roots under the ground. You don't see that, but the roots are going to go in a certain direction until they find a place there's water. Now, do plants have minds? I don't think so. But yet they have the sense they share with us. Not only are they alive and they need to maintain the cells of their bodies, but they have this possibility of sensing what's in their environment and responding accordingly.
I see the plants in my own room do that on a regular basis. Yeah.
There you go. By
Yeah.
the way, do you talk to plants?
I don't. Only my dog.
Your dog talks to plants. That's very
Oh, I'm sorry. No, I talk to my dog, but I do not talk to my plants.
okay. But does your dog talk to your plants?
I do not think so. I haven't seen her try.
that would be the real feat.
I'll let you know when that does happen.
Please do.
I want to turn a little bit to creatures that don't quite exist yet. So in your discussion of AI and robotics from your book, you don't rule out the possibility of producing a robot that is self-aware. I was hoping you could discuss that possibility and how realistic the creation of that entity might be.
Right. I think that it's quite possible that we'll be able to create or to fabricate, design and fabricate creatures that would have something in common with us at the level of feeling. So what they would need to have is some kind of detector. Again, something like I just talked about in terms of detection and sensing, and then some kind of representation of that detection in terms of a sort of broader representation of their whole body. Now, it's very important to say that this would be a sort of feeling analog, and it might give the overall organization of that artificial organism a sense of vulnerability, which is the sense of vulnerability that we have or should have regarding ourselves. I mean, we have to sense that we're vulnerable because we can have hunger and thirst and pain, and there you are. Those are the most critical of our vulnerabilities, not even to talk yet about the social vulnerabilities that come later. Now, what is very important is that once you announce that you could create a robot that, thanks to, for example, soft robotics, would sense a little bit of its environment, that is not feeling. Those creatures are not feeling for the very simple reason that they don't have life in themselves. They are designed creatures, quote unquote. You have to have the quotes. And so they don't have that core vulnerability, which has to do with life itself. So we feel vulnerable, and we are vulnerable because in the end, as living creatures, we're sort of literally, it's like flight. You can keep the plane in the air, provided you have the jets, permitting propulsion of the plane in the air. And if that fails, or if the wings fail, you crash. And that's the same thing with us. There's that vulnerability that is very intense. Now, the plane doesn't feel that vulnerability, although it's vulnerable. And these robots with soft robotics and simulacra of feelings don't feel the vulnerability, or would not feel the vulnerability once they exist, whereas we do. We come built in. We're so damn vulnerable that we actually come with a system that tells us, watch out or else.
I love that distinction between vulnerability and not. That's really interesting. We have a question from an anonymous attendee here. I like this one. So in your description, feelings and consciousness arise from neurophysiological processes that promote survival. Where do you stand on the question of free will? Might consciousness be compatible with a purely deterministic view of our activities, or is free will inherent in your understanding of consciousness?
Well, I think free will happens for us at this point in our culture. Well, it has been happening for quite a while, obviously, historically. But that's because we are able to think, we're able to reflect on our condition. And of course, once you are at that point, you can take positions as to how much can you really control of your life and where the limits are, and so forth. But those other creatures, the simpler creatures that sort of allow us to build a little bit of this history, I don't think they have free will. You know, there's no will to begin with. They are what they are, what their little minds are producing for them. And that in itself is a very interesting question, because we know, we don't know everything we should know, but because we know so much biology and we know so much now about neuroscience as well, we have the possibility of eventually deciding on which creatures clearly have the possibility of having minds and having will, and those that don't. And you could also say, of course, that even if you have all the free will in the world, your will is not going to be strong enough to stave off the bad or the destiny that your genome has set for you.
Thank you. I'm going to pivot a little bit just based on the questions we have here. Alice is asking, could you speak to feelings in a post-trauma situation and the possibility of feeling numb?
That's a very interesting question. What I can say, and I'm not at all a specialist in this area, as obviously the person who asked that question must have quite a lot of knowledge and interest in this area. And as you probably know, there are specialists that will deal with trauma and have all of the right analysis and the possibilities of intervention. By the way, I'm a neurologist, but I was never specialized in that particular area, which neurology and psychiatry and psychology have quite a lot to contribute to. But when I hear about the notion of numbness, which you encounter all the time from people that have had severe trauma, you talk sometimes to a friend that has been through some horrible experience and I feel numb. And what I see there is a reaction, an adaptation. So our brains are, of course, extremely plastic, and our brains and bodies in their interaction are extremely plastic. And once you have a certain level of pain, which may, by the way, be tolerated differently by different people, there's a certain point in which things shut down, and they shut down for your own good. So for your own good, you're not going to be feeling much. And by being numb, by shutting down the emotive effects of new experiences, you are shutting down at the same time both the good experiences and the possibility of more bad experiences, which of course our systems, being extremely intelligent to begin with, are going to want to avoid. So you want to get numb because you want to avoid more suffering. You want to avoid more trauma. It's very interesting how the I use the word intelligence there, and I want something that I discuss in the book and may be interesting for the listeners is this idea of multiple intelligences. Not in the for example, Howard Gardner used to talk about multiple intelligences, and that's in a different sense. It has to do with the different capabilities, the different specialties of our intelligence. I'm talking about multiple intelligence in the sense that bacteria give plenty of signs of intelligence, and plants give signs of intelligence. And what it really means is that they are capable of orienting their lives in what appears to be a smart way, even if it's not a smart way that they're deliberating on, because they don't know that they're being intelligent. And this is the wonder of this. So there are lots of things that we do that are very smart, and we should call them intelligent, and yet we don't know that we are being intelligent. It's just part of our resources. Now, when somebody asks me, are you going to that Halloween party that you were invited to? And I say, no, actually, I'm not. I'm being intelligent in a very conscious way because I'm going to avoid that party for a variety of risks, real or perceived. And then I'm thinking about it. But that's very different from what the plant does when it sort of pushes up in the air or projects a root under the ground.
Okay, we have a question from Jacob here. Do you draw any inspiration in studying this from religious connections? This is a topic undeniably tied to both religion and science. Where do you draw that line?
Can you repeat the beginning of the question?
Yeah. So it starts with, did you draw any inspiration in studying this from religious connections? This is a topic tied to both religion and science. Where do you draw the line?
Well, certainly draw at the level of practice, religion and science are different, and the line can be drawn very easily. I like your idea that some of the inspiration, quote unquote, could have been drawn from some conception of religion, because, of course, religion is constantly reminding us of good and bad states and of the possibility of managing good and bad states intelligently. So if you have good things, prize those good things and be careful about how you use or misuse them. And if you are in pain or suffering, find ways in which you can correct that so that you can, guess what, regain homeostasis. So probably the thing that I would say to the question is that religion in our concept, it's not that my ideas about homeostasis were influenced by religion, although I would be perfectly happy to say that they were, and they may have been. But certainly religion has been drawn from homeostasis. It's our state, it's our confrontation with our own suffering that constantly asks us to find ways of alleviating that suffering. And through and through, religion was a way of alleviating that suffering as it developed, and it continues to be for many people. So I think that the connections there are quite close. It's interesting that it can go in one way or another.
Absolutely. Yeah, my mother sees that in the field of medicine a lot. She deals with end-of-life care, and you get the same type of back and forth. Right. Okay, we have time for, I think, one or two more. This might be the last one. We'll see how much time we have. But let's see. We have a question here. Professor Damasio, thank you for your important research and wonderful presentation. Can you talk about how the findings of your research on feeling and knowing can be used in educational settings by teachers and curriculum developers? And if you could give any specific examples on that front. This question's from Mong Mu.
Very good. Well, thank you for the question. Well, I think that the field of education, as you know, you're probably an educator, and there's constant movement in that field. We're constantly finding out that the way we are teaching is not ideal, and that there are different ways in which we can approach teaching. And of course, we have the big complication that teaching has all of these levels. Here we are, Harvard Bookstore, which is connected with one of the greatest universities anywhere in the world. That level of education that we're talking about that takes place within a university is completely different from the level of education that you're talking about when you are in quote unquote grammar school. And the connection that I draw that is most important is, let's make sure that education is not seen purely in a cognitive way. If we're going to educate children to be very knowledgeable about the world and to be very rational about how they act in the world, they have to have a sense of what feelings and emotions are. This is absolutely critical for several reasons. One is that it's when you are very young that you are probably the most vulnerable in terms of your dog didn't like this. Does everybody access to her dog? He manifested himself or herself. Anyway, so it's very important to make sure that in the field of education, you don't just address the issues of cognition, the issues of enlarging your bank of knowledge and the possibility of reasoning clearly and logically over the facts, but also take care of the facts that are from our primary biology and that are going to be there whether we want it or not, when we are solving any problem in our lives, when we are being whatever kind of professional we end up being. And if you don't have that coalition, you're not going to be a very complete human being, and you're probably not going to be very good to yourself and to others around you. You need to have those two together. And I'm sure you as an educator is quite aware of this.
Well, thank you so much. That we are at time. There were so many more questions sitting here that I wish I could ask you about everything under the sun. But thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Damasio.
I'm very pleased to have joined. Thank you very much. Thank you, Greg, as well. Thank you, Kate. And it was wonderful to answer your questions. And I hope what you didn't get to ask, you can get by reading the book.
Absolutely.
Or listening to the book, which you can do too.
Or listening. Greg was just saying that he listened to the book and loved it like that too. Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening. If you would like to learn more, as we've said, copies of Feeling and Knowing are for sale on harvard.com via the links that I provided. So on behalf of Harvard Bookstore, the Harvard Division of Science, and the Harvard Library, have a great evening, keep reading, and please be well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.